Hi guys, it's Rob from Royal Balls, back from Jakarta, and I've already released some teaser footage of my trip to David Suarez's facility. I hope you enjoyed that. I'm busy working on edits to an awful lot of footage, and I know you guys are dying to see the full unedited version. It's coming. In the meantime, I got a lot of positive feedback about the last video that I released on the vanilla clowns and the small section that I did on genetics. So in the interim, what I'm going to do today is a little bit more genetics, and I'm going to use a real world example that a viewer has sent in, and it's quite a good one. There are many different genetic combinations. Genetics, I feel, should be accessible and easy to understand for everybody, and there are tools online that you can use. There's a genetic wizard or genetic calculator in World of Ball Pythons or at Morph Market, and for many people that's sufficient. But for those of you that have ever wondered how those genetic calculators work, how they figure out what the various combinations are and assign a probability to them, this video's for you. Genetics, as we've seen, is actually relatively straightforward. When you work out the probabilities of the various outcomes, that is simple statistics. It's not even genetics. And I can hear you all groaning now, oh, that's going to mean numbers. Well, yes it is, but again, let's keep it simple. Most of the genetic outcomes are binary. The gene is either present or it's not. So in terms of probability, it's no more complicated than flipping a coin, heads or tails. Heads it's there, tails it's not. It's important to note that when we talk about probabilities, these are average probabilities for a large sample size. So over many years and many clutches, you can expect to get ratios and probabilities of various outcomes that will approach the numbers that are given. But for you, with only a 6 or 8 egg clutch, you sometimes will not see the numbers that the statistics would have you believe. For instance, one of the genes that's present in the combination we're going to look at is banana, and it might be that you're trying to produce banana combos, and statistically there's a 50-50 chance that the offspring will carry the banana gene. But sometimes, for instance in an 8 egg clutch, you might get 6 bananas and 2 non-bananas. You might, however unlikely that might be, end up with no bananas. You toss the coin 8 times and you get tails every time. Statistically very unlikely, but it is a possible outcome. So you need to bear that in mind when we look at some of these numbers. Don't take them literally. Your mileage may vary. Okay, let's do this. So the male is a lovely banana enchy blade clown. Just look at this guy, very spectacular. And the female is also very spectacular, a super pastel crystal. That's a Mojave special allelic combo, a pinstripe. So this genetic combination has got a little bit of everything. It's got a recessive, it's got a super codominant, it's got a codominant allelic combination. So let's take our genetic calculator and let me show you that even with this fairly complex combination, the genetics is actually quite simple. So here is our male and here is our female. So along the genetic material here, this is all the genetic information that's required to make a snake. There's everything in here: body shape, eyes, head, digestive system, lungs. There's only a very small piece of this genetic code that is actually related to skin colour and pattern. And each of the genes or genetic modifiers from a normal that does not carry any genes, each of the genetic modifiers has a specific address that it can fit in, and only that gene can fit in into that address. So the male is a visual clown, so we're going to use yellow for clown. So at the clown address, because this is a recessive gene, the male is carrying 2 copies of the clown gene. He is also carrying, at a different address, 1 copy of the banana gene. He's also carrying 1 copy of the enchi gene, and he's also carrying 1 copy of the blade gene. That is the genetic combination of the male. So he has 2 copies of the clown gene, 1 copy of the banana gene, 1 copy of the enchi gene, and 1 copy of the blade gene. Now, because each of these genes occupies a different address, we don't need to look at all of the genes combined. We're going to treat each of the genes separately. Just because he's a clown does not increase or decrease the chances of him passing on the banana gene, does not increase or decrease the possibility of him passing on the enchi gene or the blade gene. They all work independently, so we'll treat them one at a time. So we'll take the clown gene first. So when we breed him to the female, we are going to use half the genetic material from the male and combine it with half the genetic material from the female, and you will notice that the female is not carrying any copies of the clown gene. She's not even a het for clown. She's not a visual clown. She's not even a het for clown. She carries no copies of the clown gene. So there are 4 possible outcomes. So we take this half of the male's genetic material and we pair it to this half or this half of the female's genetic material, and that gives us 1 copy of the clown gene in each of those 2 boxes. We take this half of the male's genetic material and pair to here or to here, and that gives us 1 copy of the clown gene in each of those boxes. So there are only 4 potential outcomes because there are only 4 halves of the genetic material, and each of those outcomes has 1 copy of the clown gene. So in this pairing, we know already this is a visual recessive to a non-recessive, so all of the babies are going to be het for clown. Each of the squares carries 1 copy. So if we wanted to keep score, I keep another spreadsheet with each of the genes So this is the clown portion, and each of those squares contains 1 copy of the clown gene. So all of the offspring are going to be 100% het for clown. The male is also a banana. He carries 1 copy of the banana gene. There we go. So 1 half of his genetic material is carrying a copy of the banana gene. 1 half of his genetic material is not. So when we take this half of the male's genetic material and pair it to this half of the female, he passes on 1 copy of the banana gene. Pair it to this half of the female and he passes on 1 copy of the banana gene. If we take the other half of the male's genetic material, which isn't carrying the banana gene, we compare to here or to here, and we get no copies of the banana gene. So we can go back to our score sheet. This is banana. So 50% or half of the potential outcomes will carry the banana gene. So everything is het for clown. 50% of the babies are carrying a copy of the banana gene. The male is also enchi, and I don't think I need to do this again. It's exactly the same. Pair this to this or this to this and the outcome is exactly the same. So enchi is 50% of the potential outcomes will have the enchi gene, 50% of the outcomes will not. So on our score sheet, now we have 100% het for clown, 50% banana, 50% enchi, and the blade gene is exactly the same. Potential outcomes are 50-50. Pair the half of the male that isn't carrying the gene to the female, and that gives us no copies. Pair the half of the male to either half of the female, and that gives us one copy of the blade gene. So again, it's a 50-50 outcome. So each of the codominant genes is giving us exactly the same outcome, and you don't need this square. Once you get that straight in your head, it's the same outcome every time we deal with a single copy of a codominant gene. Half of the babies will carry that gene, half of the babies will not. So again, on our score sheet, we now have 100% het for clown, 50% banana, 50% enchi, 50% blade. So in order to get het for clown, banana, enchi, there's a 25% chance that it will be banana, enchi, het for clown. Add in the blade gene, and this is simple probabilities. It is not genetic. So the probability is 50%, 50%, 50%, which translates to 50% times 50% is 25%, times another 50% is 12.5%. So that is where you get on Morph Market your genetic calculator. That's where you get the percentages or the odds of any particular genetic combination. Okay, let's do the female. So the female over here is super pastel. So in her genetic code, she is carrying 2 copies of the pastel gene. She is a super pastel. And you will see that the similarities now between a recessive homozygous form and a codominant homozygous form, they act exactly the same way. So if we take the super pastel, this half of the female to either half of the male's genetic material, and we get 1 copy or 1 copy. We take the other half of the female's genetic material to either half of the male, and we get 1 copy or 1 copy. So each of the babies will be carrying 1 copy of the pastel gene, and because pastel is a codominant gene, it has a visual expression. So all the babies will be pastel. Note that the female is a super pastel. She cannot pass on 2 copies of the gene to her offspring, so you can never get super pastel from one pastel parent when the other parent is not carrying the gene. In order to get super pastel, both parents must be carrying a copy of the gene, and let me just illustrate that. So remember that outcome. From this particular pairing, all the babies are pastel. What happens if both parents are just single pastel? So both parents are carrying 1 copy of the gene. So we take this half of the male that's carrying a copy of the pastel gene to this half of the female, which is not carrying a copy. That's 1 copy of the pastel gene. We take this half of the male that's carrying a copy of the pastel gene and pair it to this half of the female, which is also carrying a copy of the pastel gene. We now get 2 copies of the pastel gene, so super pastel. Now we take the other half of the male, pair it to this half of the female, no copies, no copies, this square here, so that's a normal, no copies of the pastel gene. This half of the male to this half of the female passes on 1 copy of the pastel gene. So you can see in the case of the pastel gene being present 1 copy in each parent, we get 1 normal, 2 pastels, and 1 super pastel for every 4 babies. So 25% of the babies will be super pastel, 25% of the babies will be normal, 50% of the babies will be pastel. So that's the difference between the super form and 2 copies of the pastel gene split between the parents. So if you remember, in this case we were dealing with the female being the super form, so in that case the outcome is pastel in all of the squares. So all the babies will be pastel. So if we pass that on to our score sheet, this is all the babies being pastel. So remember, we work this exactly the same way, that all the genes work independently, except the female is a crystal, which is a Mojave special, and the Mojave and special genes are both codominant genes. They belong to the same complex and they fit at the same genetic address. They are different genes, they have a different visual appearance, but they occupy the same address, and when they occupy the same address, it's an allelic combination. This is what's known as acts like a super, because there is actually a copy of the gene on each side of the female. It's just that it's a different gene. So if we take this side, which is carrying 1 copy of the Mojave gene, and we pair that to this half of the male or this half of the male, we get the Mojave gene being passed on. If we take this half of the female, which is carrying the special gene, and we pair it to this half of the male or to that half of the male, we get 1 copy of the special gene being passed on. So notice now that there are no normals. 50% of the babies are Mojave, 50% of the babies are special. So let's put that onto our score sheet. So that's the allelic combination taken care of. So everything is pastel, and there is a 50% chance that it will be pastel Mojave and a 50% chance that it will be pastel special. One more gene to go in the female, and that's pinstripe. This is a dominant gene. It's dominant because it has such a very strong visual expression that only 1 copy completely changes the appearance of the snake, and theoretically there is no superform to a dominant gene. If there is a superform, visually it looks no different. So in this case we have pinstripe. So again, we do exactly the same thing. The gene is working completely independently to any of the other genes. Just because the previous combos have either been passed on or not been passed on does not increase or decrease the odds of passing on the pinstripe gene. So again, we've seen this before. 1 copy of the pinstripe gene here and here gives 2 of the babies have 1 copy of pinstripe, and the other half of the female carries no copy, so does not pass on the gene. So again, it's that 50-50 split between the offspring. 50% of the babies will be pinstripe, 50% of the babies will be normals, not carrying the pinstripe gene. So again, when we look at the genetic possibilities from the female, everything is pastel. There's a 50% chance that it will be pastel Mojave, a 50% chance that it will be pastel special, and there's an additional 50% chance that it will be carrying the pinstripe gene or will be normal. So it's pastel, 50% chance of Mojave, 50% chance of it being pinstripe or not pinstripe. So 50% times 50% is 25%, or 1 in 4. So you have a 1 in 4 chance of it being pastel, Mojave, pinstripe, or a 25% chance of it being pastel, special, pinstripe. Whatever combination you pick, once you have this chart, you're simply multiplying the odds of each individual gene together to get the overall odds for the whole possible combos. So let's just summarize now what we actually got from this combination. So the male was a clown. So every single offspring is going to be het for clown. The female was super pastel. So So every single offspring is going to be pastel. The female was also crystal, that allelic combination of Mojave and special. So all the babies are going to be either Mojave or special. No normals from that allelic combo, but there's a 50% chance that they'll be Mojave, a 50% chance that they'll be special. Pinstripe was 50-50, banana was 50-50, Enchi was 50-50, and blade was 50-50. So everything is het for clown, everything is pastel, everything is either Mojave or special, and there's a 50% chance of it being Mojave, a 50% chance of it being special. There's a 50% chance of it being pinstripe, a 50% chance of it being banana, a 50% chance of it being Enchi, and a 50% chance of it being blade. So when you multiply that out, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lots of 50-50, which is a 3.125% or 1 in 32 chance of getting all of the genes into the snake. But there's also the same possibility of getting any of the individual combinations. Because each of the individual genes is working independently, there's a 50% chance that it will be present, there's a 50% chance that it will not. So if, for instance, you work through the combinations and you say, I'd like to get pastel het for clown, that's guaranteed. Everything is going to be pastel het for clown, and I'd like it to be special, not Mojave, so automatically there's a 50% chance of getting that combination. I would like it not to have pinstripe, so automatically there's a 50% chance that the babies will be or won't be pinstripe. So that is now a 25% chance. Add in banana, that's another 50%. Add in Enchi, that's another 50%. Add in blade, that's another 50%. So any of the combinations you choose have exactly the same potential probability in their outcome. 1 in 32 or 3.125%. So I will leave you to run through the individual combinations that you could possibly get. It's a lot. It's an awesome combination because it contains a recessive, everything will be het for clown. It contains a superform, so everything will be pastel. It contains an allelic combination, just to throw a little spanner into the genetic calculation. And then we have pinstripe, which is dominant, which is a 50-50 shot. And then 3 co-dominants, banana, Enchi and blade. So you have an awful lot of potential outcomes that you could get. Every single one of them has a 1 in 32 chance of occurring. And since the female is going to lay only about 6 to 8 eggs, that will be an average clutch, you are not going to get all the possible combinations. So it'll be quite an event when the babies start pipping and you cut into the eggs to see what you've got. It'll be awesome to try and sort out which babies are carrying which genes. That's how the probabilities work. That's how Morph Market and the genetic calculators that you see online derived their odds. You will notice that all the odds are multiples of or divisions of 4, and that's because each of the genes only has 4 potential outcomes. So your odds are going to be 1 in 4, 1 in 16, 1 in 32, 1 in 64. They're all multiples or divisions of 4. Okay guys, so that's the genetic calculator in action. So we've had a look at some fairly complex genetics and probabilities and broken it down into fairly easy to understand probabilities. It's important to realise that with genetics that there is a probability of the gene occurring and there's also a probability of the gene not occurring. So in a particular combo we may not want a gene to be present. Unfortunately, many times the pairings that we are about to do are the perfect pairing to get the combo that we want, but one of the parents has an extra gene and we have no requirement for that gene in our pairing, but we have no choice but to pair those snakes and take what we get. So it's interesting to note, for instance, that in the previous pairing, let's say that we did not want pastel. We wanted everything else in the combo, but we did not want pastel.
One of the parents in the example is a super pastel, so that would be a very bad choice because everything is going to be pastel. That not getting the pastel gene is a physical impossibility. What happens if both of the parents carry a pastel gene? Well, in that case, we work that example as well, and you can see that there, if you do not want the pastel gene, and the pastel gene is present in both parents, there is a 25% probability or 25% possibility that the pastel gene will be absent. 1 in 4 of those squares did not carry the pastel gene. So it is a possible outcome, even if both parents carry the pastel gene. If only one of the parents carries the pastel gene and we do not want the pastel gene in the combinations, there is a 50-50 chance that the offspring will not carry the pastel gene. So statistically, on average, half the babies will not carry the pastel gene. So that would be a viable choice for some combos that did not contain the pastel gene. Obviously, in the real world, if you do not want pastel in your combinations, the ideal pairing would be both parents not having pastel. But as I said, we're sometimes forced into using a pairing that does not have the ideal set of genes, and we want to work out what the possibility is of that gene not occurring in our outcomes. So if, like me, you have a desire to understand how genetic calculators work, before very long, using this very simple method, you start to do it in your head. It becomes second nature. You don't need a genetic calculator, and it certainly helps when you're visualizing your pairings and what the potential outcomes are going to be if you can do it in your head. There are only a limited number of outcomes for any given gene, homozygous or heterozygous forms of the genetic morph, and pretty soon you have that in your head, in your memory, and you do it automatically. So that's it, guys. Thanks very much to Richard Bence for sending that example in. I hope you enjoyed watching. Don't forget to share, like and subscribe. Stay tuned because the David Suarez video will be coming out soon. Thanks for watching. See you next time.